Welcome, team, to the show. I don't know about tonight whether it's going to be a good show or a bad show or a happy show or a sad show, but I just put out a tweet just a few minutes ago after watching the start of 3 News' coverage, and they said that there was 116 cuts in this budget. And my tweet said, I'll get it to you because it's genius comedy, we can't miss it, says this. Rod Stewart saying the first cut is the deepest. Wonder if Nicola Willis can let us know, understand what the 116th cut feels like. Barb, you've been there. You've seen that. You didn't get to shake Nicola's hands. Mind you, neither did the leaders of Te Pāti Māori. I noticed they went there. I just tell us your first reactions, I guess, to the budget, but also to what the ongoings in the House were today.
Yeah, so we, the opposition and Te Pāti Māori and the Greens, we get let into a room with Treasury an hour before the budget is released at 2. And so, obviously we prep as much as we can. We come prepared looking at the numbers and, I just looked at the numbers and I was just like, wow. So it really is, you're making working women pay for this. And it's just appalling. And astounding, just the number that they're willing to cut from working women's pay for the future to pay for things like giving, tech giants tax cuts. It's just, appalling.
Me and Craig had a chat this afternoon once the budget was released, and I think similarly to working women, then there's also the youth who are now going to have to live with mummy and daddy until they're 20, apparently. This is good, though, because this current government, I'm assuming now, is also going to treat like an 18-year-old in the courts like a minor. Because if they're going to treat an 18-year-old on wins like a minor, then I'm assuming that 18 to 19-year-olds in the justice system will also be minors. I'm just figuring, because obviously they're consistent, that'll be the case. But also young families where the cutoff for the early, what's it called, the early start, the first start, the best start. Is a family income of $97,000, which is basically 2 parents working full-time on minimum wage. So minimum wage, 2 parents no longer gets any help for best start for their kids going into ECE. So yeah, I was going to ask you guys at some stage tonight what's good out of this. Like, even if you can put on your faux, hey, let's be a right winger for a night, what's good out of this? I couldn't really find anything. What about you, Craig? We talked at 2:30 or so it's been 6 or 7 hours. What other things do you need to tell us about to start off this conversation tonight?
Well, I've desperately looked for that silver lining that you're talking about, Pat. I've definitely looked for the sort of, the rainbow, which, allegedly when it rains, you also get a rainbow. Still looking for it. Still trying to find it. One thing I'd say is this: in reading the documents, because you get a big pile of them in the lockup, I kept being reminded of the National Party phrase, back on track. Sort of, do you feel back on track? Right? There are 22,000 more people on job seekers than was forecast just at the last budget. Do you feel back on track? Wages are going up less quickly than they did, forecast last year. Or do you feel back on track? Money is out of, Best Start. We're taking money away from people on working for families. We're taking, there's lower economic growth. GDP per capita is much lower than previously forecast. Debt goes up, borrowing yet more money despite all those cuts. $8.4 billion of cuts across the forecast period. And I kept thinking to myself, do I feel back on track yet? And I didn't. So I really then delved into the numbers to try and make myself feel back on track. And I just want to give you one early insight into something I think sort of really gives you something away. We're spending $30 million more boot camps.
Yeah.
Right?
Because they work so well. That was good money.
Yeah, failed so badly the first time round, we thought we'd lash another $30 million at it just to be really sure that we could be back on track. So, there's lots of things in the budget which we'll go through tonight to talk about in terms of, why we think this doesn't work, why I think most New Zealanders wouldn't think it would work. Mm-hmm. But, if you're looking for a silver lining here, the only silver lining is, one, there's so little money left in future budgets that budget documents next time around will be really short because there's actually very, very little cash to spend in future. And two, there's vanishingly little in this budget that will be popular. And the odds on this being a one-term government just got a little bit shorter at this election, at this budget, because there's nothing in here. And bearing in mind, this is the budget that will be real when people go to the polls. Because the next budget, it's too late. Stuff will be spent, things won't be happening. This is the stuff that will make a difference when you actually get to the next election. And what we're seeing here is more cuts in education, more cuts in health, and a range of other areas. There's nothing in here that's going to give a National Party worker knocking on the door and saying, vote for us in 26, a really good reason to ask the public to vote for them again.
And it really is, that they package this as a going for growth budget. It sure is. It's a growing homelessness because you've stripped $1 billion away from emergency housing. So it's harder for people to get emergency housing. And so basically they're left on the streets or in cars. It's growing unemployment, and it's growing pay gap between men and women. It's just astounding that they basically were able to stand up in the House and beat their chest. And, and all of this, what does Chris Bishop do? He tweets about, Barbara Edmonds, the finance spokesperson, is not in the House. Yes, neither was Nicola Willis last time the budget was in the House when she was in opposition, because we're out doing media and we're out crunching the numbers. So that shows exactly where their focus was. And their lineup of attacks in the last week, it was quite clear they were on the defensive and they were just trying to attack because they knew that today was not going to be a good day.
Yeah, okay. Let's get into this. Let's get into some of the finer details. But before we do that, let's just let people know that we're having a bit of a special tonight, because if you've had a cut affect you, maybe we can help you out a little bit. You buy anything on the merch shop between now and midnight Sunday. So if you listen to this on demand, it's the same for you. Now and midnight Sunday, you can have free postage. Use the promo code budget 2025, and anything you buy between now and midnight Sunday, we will send to you for free. The other thing to be aware of is if you do that, we are still going to donate the Safe Nights to Women's Refuge as well. So free shipping, and for a hoodie, a Safe Night to Women's Refuge, and for 2 t-shirts, a Safe Night to Women's Refuge. All you need to do is head to bhnshop.nz and use the promo code budget 2025, which will stay rolling down the bottom of the screen. If you feel like, because of these guys, I'm $7 short a week now, well, we'll cover the postage for you, and you can support us and also Women's Refuge. Chewie, before we rip into some finer details, do you want to jump in with thoughts or ideas or questions about this budget?
Craig said it's not popular. Let's check in with stuff. Oh, that's not very good.
I'm surprised it's a third say yes, to be honest.
That's the dyed in the wool, like, I'll never say anything bad about my team guys. I assume that they don't have teenagers. They don't plan to get to retirement. They've got 17 properties in their portfolio. I assume that's them.
All right.
I can tell you, Chewie. I can tell you, Chewie, as someone who used to work in the opposition unit, that will be the opposition unit. That will be the National Labour Leaders Office working round the clock, repressing the yes button over and over again to try and balance that particular score. Not that we've ever done that in the past.
I think it's this one will shock no one. I think it's a disastrous budget. Like watching the speeches in the House and going, oh look, they're giving themselves pats on the back and victory laps and everything. I've never seen something so disconnected with what they were actually announcing. It just felt like I was having some sort of mental episode.
Yeah.
Minimum wage going up 33 cents. Really? You're going to take away the KiwiSaver contribution again, just like you did last time you had a crack and the piggy bank was a little bit empty. You raided KiwiSaver again. It's short-term thinking. You're costing people the compounding interest. You are not considering what the whole point of KiwiSaver was to do some of the heavy lifting, because our super fund is not going to be able to cope with what's coming. It was a way of kickstarting saving, because Kiwis are terrible at saving. For a lot of people, KiwiSaver was their first attempt at thinking about retirement. And a big part of that was, if you contribute a certain amount, we'll match it. That'll build into a compounding interest fund that you will take advantage of when you hit retirement age. I saw it mentioned that for someone that is entering the workforce now, what National has done is effectively taken $66,000 out of their retirement fund in today's money.
Wow.
And you put that, if we're talking about that same person that's entering into the workplace, into this job market, where there's so many people looking for work and not enough jobs around, where those 18, 19-year-olds are going to be pushed aside for people with more age, more experience, that sort of thing. Even though they're voting adults, tax-paying adults, apparently the only way they'll get help is if mum and dad are on the bones of their ass as well. Are you an adult or aren't you?
Yeah. I think I've got a question, actually, a specific question about that to ask. Maybe we can start there with the, the changes to the beneficiaries. I also want to know, what happens is you get the headlines, and if these are the headlines that National is crowing about, I'm fearful that there's so much worse behind them that we haven't yet found out about. Maybe you guys can tell us about that. But one specific question, so I'll see if I've got this right. 18 and 19-year-olds, the plan is it's going to be harder for them to get a job seeker. Nicola Willis, and I wish I'd have queued it up, I can go and find it, one of the worst Tory slam the beneficiary comments ever, when she was in the lockup with you guys, Craig, and she said, well, mothers have been talking to me and saying, how do I get my kid off the couch from playing PlayStation games because he's just been given a welfare check. And I'm just like, fucking hello, Margaret Thatcher, what's going on here? But I wanted to know this. Logistically, someone's just turned 18, like today, and they get a job seeker. And April 1st, which is, I think, when they said it would come in, they're still 18. Could they then get removed from it and thrown off it and then have to go under mum and dad from that point on?
The honest answer right now, Pat, is that we don't know.
Right.
The honest answer is that they haven't decided what level of income a parent will have to have in order for that 18-year-old in order to be then reliant upon their parents. We don't know what new rules will be applied. We don't know many things because Cabinet has yet to make those decisions. All we know is that they've banked $164 million in savings from that particular decision. So we don't know the answer to that. But it was actually slightly worse than the sort of parody statement that you made, because the statement Nicola made just before that, when she was asked the question, what do you think parents will think of this particular decision? And she said, I think parents will welcome this. So how out of touch are you in terms of that particular decision?
There's only 2 clips on stuff with her, so she's one of these. Let's see if it's this one.
That policy, because I have met with the parents of young people who say to me, what am I meant to do to get my son off the couch playing PlayStation all day when the government just gives them a welfare check?
There's a boost in the...
I think parents are going to welcome that policy.
There you go.
Because I have met with the parents of young people who say to me, what am I meant to do to get my son off the couch playing PlayStation all day when the government just gives them a welfare check?
There's a boost.
I love it when they do this as well, when jobs are hard to find. It's not like there's so many, oh my God, look, I walk down the street and jobs literally fall out of my pockets and I don't even pick them up because there's so many jobs going around. But currently unemployment being up, jobs being harder to find, let's kick those 18 and 19-year-olds off there. I heard that statement and all I could think was, this is a caricature of the worst kind of Tory slam, the Benny bashing from the 80s onward sort of thing. Barb, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, well, she effectively has just said that all their changes to the benefit that they've done then have failed. They've made all these different changes to benefits. You've got to go in, you've got to go do all these work tests. They want to get people off the benefit and into work. She has effectively just admitted, because she's spoken to these parents, that they've failed. So then, where's the justice then with all those changes that you've made, including more benefit sanctions? If you're saying women are coming, or mothers and parents are coming to you and saying, can you help me get my 18-year-old off the couch? It's like, that's a failure. So she's failed on both sides.
Yeah, Craig, what, as I was saying before, a little bit tongue in cheek, but obviously not. If this is the headline that they're happy to talk about, what are we not seeing? What's behind the headlines?
So we're seeing, some quite significant cuts to some big departments. So we saw some really big cuts, for example, to Māori development. We saw some quite big cuts to vote Pacific Island peoples. We saw, for example, that there's no real new money in vote health. So they set aside some money for the cost of living. That was set aside at the last budget. They set aside some money for the cancer drugs that they promised at the last budget, but forgot to deliver. And then they paid for them with this budget. After that, there's actually nothing. There's no money at all, no new investment just about inside health. The money that they're using to pay for the learning support money comes from cancelling a range of teaching programs that were agreed as part of the collective agreement between teachers and the Ministry for Education. They're increasing tuition fees by 6%, on top of the 6% fee that they increased last year. So they're making it more difficult to get into tertiary education at exactly the time we want people to be getting into tertiary education, because there's a shortage of jobs. Now's the best time to get some skills so that you can go out and get a new job when the labour market picks up. They're doing all the things which, a classic right-wing government does. Let's bash some beneficiaries, right? Let's make the government ability to do things harder and smaller, right? So that when the good times come, they can say, let's have a tax cut because we don't have a reason to invest. So this was a budget set up, to my mind, thinking very much about the next election. When we look at, for example, the KiwiSaver changes, that to me is very much trying to soften the country up for a conversation about the retirement age. Let's increase KiwiSaver contributions so that later on we can say, listen, we're all putting more money aside. If we lift the contributions to KiwiSaver, we'll all be better off. So to me, there's a range of things in there which speak to the governing party of this coalition not really being national but ACT, and the economic philosophy that's governing what's going on being an ACT governing philosophy, rather than kind of John Key wouldn't have done most of these things, right? Me and John Key wouldn't agree on a lot of things, but he wouldn't be agreeing to many of these particular programs, right? We're also seeing, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, all the housing programs over the next 4 years, right? It sees over the next 4 years, the entire housing and urban development budget sees a cut of $10,000. That's it. That's nothing. There's no money, just $10,000 less cash. It's wild. This is what I mean by it's going to be unpopular, because there's nothing in here to sell. There's nothing in here to talk about. There's nothing in here except to say we've cut a lot of things. We've cut $12.8 billion out of pay equity for 300,000 low-paid, female-dominated workforces. We've cut support for women. We've cut support for children. We've cut support for ACE programs. That's going up by much less than inflation. All the people that we want to see supported, we've taken money away from. And we've used that money, as Barbara quite rightly said, to then give money to Google, Meta, Facebook, right? Large multinational companies. We've given it to energy-intensive, capital-intensive firms. Fantastic. But we've also done not a thing for climate change. There is no climate change expenditure in this budget. So, what is it they're hiding? I don't think they're hiding much. Anybody who wants to go in there will be able to see that actually, beyond the headlines of a few KiwiSaver changes, this is a do-nothing budget, and a cut budget. And that will become very clear over the next few months.
But Craig, we gave you $7 a week extra for some families. You know, that's just enough to possibly buy maybe about 400 grams of butter. But they didn't talk about the 61,000 people that will lose, on average, $21.50 a week because of those Best Start and Working for Families changes. Didn't hear that in the speech today.
I can tell you're the MP for Manor because I sit here in Houghton Bay, in Rongotai, and it wouldn't buy 400 grams of butter. It wouldn't buy 350, because it's already more expensive than that. And and we're seeing inflation rise. We're seeing food prices rise at their fastest rate in 2.5 years. Yet we're cutting the budgets for some of the most vulnerable people in the country.
That's a
Sounds like someone's about to be murdered. Who's about to be murdered? Someone.
Okay.
Holy
Need some,
mackerel.
CWC.
I just wanted to say as well, a little bit of context here for those 18 and 19-year-olds. The apprenticeship program was gutted last time round. Like the tools that would have been used by kids, like Nicola has said, hey, look, we'd rather these 18 and 19-year-olds be in work or be in training. Fantastic.
Yep, agreed.
That's a great thing. Can you now pair that with there are jobs for kids at this age, or there are avenues for training? Because you took all of those away. 25% unemployment rate in the youth bracket. 25%. And if you don't get your foot on that ladder of getting that job experience to be able to put on your resume for the next job, for the next job, for the next job. You know, if you look at Seek at the moment, the number of jobs that I would consider entry level, the sort of jobs that I would say are aimed at that sort of 18 to say early 20s, 22, they're all saying 2 to 3 years experience, please, because they know the job market is flooded, so they can be picky.
And so what we're going to see,
all of these people nervous to accept low wages, poor conditions, and don't rock the boat if you do get a job. It's not for the benefit of these kids at all. I don't care what anecdote Nicola Willis has pulled out of her ass that she spoke to someone and said, I can't possibly motivate my child. Could you please come down like a sledgehammer on everybody with a teenager? That'll fix it.
You know, do you remember that there was that Australian ad with Lara Bingle, and she's standing on some remote island in Australia, and it's like, where the bloody hell are you? Yeah, that's the ad that's running through my head right now. The Australians are basically saying, where the bloody hell are you? Because we'll pay you more. You might be able to buy your first home, and it's quite clear your government doesn't support you, so come on over. That's exactly what this budget says.
If people have missed it, I was going to say one thing. I think we are being a little bit unfair, though, Barb. You said $7 a week. Come on, it's $14 a fortnight. And that's much more.
That's a bigger number.
It's a much bigger number.
That's better.
Gary Payinda said to us, and I'm sure you guys know this, but for the audience's sake, is that pay for specialist doctors, so doctors who go through 7 years of training and then another 5 years of, I guess, being junior doctors, and then they come out at 32, 33 on a certain salary. In Australia, that 32-year-old gets paid as much as a doctor who's done that and had 15 more steps up the pay ladder. So the 32-year-olds in Australia are straight into where, the 48-year-olds are in New Zealand on pay. And look, we all know that doctors and nurses, they don't do it for the money. But come on. Money is a contributing factor, money and conditions, pay and conditions to having people choose to work and live in a situation. So yeah, where the bloody hell are you? I mean, we've seen them. We've seen police advertisements going into Whakatane or Portiki, was it? There was that, they were like specifically in that area saying, come to Queensland, keep your rank, we'll pay you more, we'll pay you to get over here. Yeah, and this budget's done nothing to ease any of those. So that would have been a tangible outcome. Chloe's been saying it all this week, 191 people a day, 191 people a day. If this budget's going to be positive, in 6 months from now, it's going to be 150 people a day. But my fear is it's going to be 250 people a day, and that'll be directly trackable to today.
Well, certainly this is all part of the same story, Pat, that we're looking at, again, we were promised at the election that cutting spending, that cutting investment, that $14 billion of a tax cut, $3 billion for landlords, $1.5 billion for tobacco companies, this would get us all back on track. We just needed a bit of fiscal discipline, a bit of fiscal management, and suddenly businesses would be investing. Suddenly people would be building new housing. Suddenly the economy would be humming again because we would have confidence. We have all of those things in the wrong direction right now. And the data from this budget tells us the forecasts are continuing to point us in the wrong direction. So the challenge we have is that there's a phrase where I come from: beatings will continue until morale improves, right? We're going to keep doing this over and over again, right? In the hope that, this gets better eventually. And I mean, like a stopped clock, it will, but the punishment we will have gone through to get there will not have been worth it. Instead, we will have sent many of our, youngest, most talented people overseas. We will have lost big sections of the economy. Many people will be further behind. Inequality will have rocketed. And guess what? It won't be worth it. We'll still have more debt. We'll still be spending more money on benefits. And the only difference will be that, we'll have a different government, hopefully.
Hey, there is a segment of the New Zealand population that receives some very good news in the budget today. And I haven't seen it mentioned in the mainstream media, and I haven't seen you mention it, Craig, in any of your many interviews you did today. Let's talk about people that sell utes. Because businesses get more tax deductibility buying machinery. That sounds like a loophole big enough to drive a Ford Raptor through. Those guys will be screaming. It's payday. So it's not all doom and gloom. There is some benefit to wearing a swag hat. I'm going to pivot into selling gas-guzzling utes, and I'm going to build a house on a hill.
You're not wrong. I think there'll be a lot of people who look at that particular change and say to themselves, I'm getting the uplift package on my next double cab ute because I can write it off. Doing accelerated depreciation should, in theory, allow you to bring forward more investment. The challenge you have is that when you do it in this very uncoordinated way, you buy a lot of stuff that was going to be bought anyway. So there's a huge, what we call in economics, deadweight cost. Stuff that was going to get bought anyway, you end up paying tax for. But then two, the incentives in the system encourage people to go, ooh, I can now do that rather than this. And they purchase things differently. And for 70% of the economy, which is the services sector, this means very little. It's people selling stuff to everybody else. It's people doing business services to each other. For the manufacturing sector, it might mean something that's 10% of the economy. And even then, it's probably quite a small part of the overall manufacturing sector. The question you should always ask is that worth $1.7 billion a year? Or could you spend that $1.7 billion better somewhere else? The answer, with the child poverty numbers heading in the direction that they're heading, I'd argue you could spend that money better somewhere else. Instead, we're choosing right now to give yet more money to those companies at the same time as cutting benefits, at the same time as cutting expenditure elsewhere.
Now, Nicola mentioned this as a big plus, and I think the scenario that she came up with, she must have been huffing gas out the back of Parliament before she did her interview, but she was saying that this would enable businesses to buy more efficient machinery or more efficient plant or equipment that would increase efficiency and increase profits, and that would of course flow on to the workers' wages. Has that ever happened ever? or would the business just look at the fatter profit margin that they've generated? The government isn't mandating higher wages. And in fact, there's shitloads of people looking for work. So the workers are, again, as I mentioned, afraid to ask for more. So big fat profits, no trickle down. This is a budget that's built on economic vandalism and ignorance. It's just unhinged, the positions that she thinks that this flow-on effect is going to have, that it's going to exist at all.
Do you want to go, Bobs? Otherwise, I'll just keep talking.
I mean, budget's just all about choices, right? It's the 1.7 billion here. It's the $500 million tax break for the multinationals there. It's the $2.9 billion for landlords. I'm going to play the devil's advocate here and say, at least with this tax cut, it could have been paid for by elsewhere. I'm just thinking of the smaller businesses who actually this might help them. But there are those, which Craig has said, those that are going to spend the money anyway, and they're just like, well, thank you very much for that. So it could have even been targeted even better. But again, in the context of everything, you just can't get away from the women and their daughters, because there's been a lot of talk from women inside this place here in Parliament about our daughters. You know what? Our daughters are fine. We are tertiary educated women on a 6-figure salary. Our girls are fine. But actually, those women who are the hospice nurses, who are the Plunkett nurses, who are the community midwives, it's their daughters that we need to be protecting the future for, not ours.
Yeah. Hey, we have a lot of people in the chat right now, and there are people who want to ask questions and stuff, and we normally kind of leave it till the end. But if you guys are okay, we'll go to some of the specific questions because they're directed to you guys, and see if we can answer some of them. So the first one is for you, Barb, from JG. Barbara, can IRD systems handle this new 20% in the first year rule? Will they need millions of upgrades to change from a normal SL or DV depreciation? You might want to unpack the code words in there as well.
Yeah, so SL is straight line or DV is diminished value. That's how you calculate the different formulas for calculating how you depreciate your asset over its estimated useful life. So actually, it's really about, the tax system is self-assessment. So it's actually people who put in their returns. They need to be able to do those calculations for themselves, work out how much tax they've got to pay. So technically, it's just the people that need to check it at IRD, and there are flags in the system that are built up that if a particular sector is, you're claiming back you're saying that you're claiming back something like 30K, but actually your sector average is probably only about 10K, that might raise a flag. So it's not really the system issue because tax is based on self-assessment. So people will be doing that with their accountants or themselves, will be calculating those depreciation rates and then submitting them as part of their return.
I was thinking as well, I mean, we could sit here and ask, like the trained monkeys we are, and ask you all sorts of questions about swinging tires and bananas. But you guys are the experts. What else do we need to know? What questions do we need to get out to the people? What information do we need to get out there as we are now sitting back going, okay, we've seen the headlines. They're taking $12.8 billion away from working women. They're saving $5.6 billion, I think, over the first year. But what else do we need to know? What are the questions that we actually should be asking you guys?
Well, I mean, certainly for me, the question that I'd be asking the public to have a look at is, one, to engage with the budget, even at a really sort of surface level. There's some good documents, the budget at a glance. There's there's kind of the summary of initiatives that will tell you where the money's going, what's new and what's being cut. And once you've done that, engage with your family, engage with your workers, engage with your colleagues, engage with the people that you meet with, and talk to them about the changes that are in here. Because many of the things that the press will be talking about over the next few days are things like the KiwiSaver changes. They'll be talking about the investment in new infrastructure. What they won't be talking about are the cuts that are in there. What they won't be talking about are the changes to welfare regimes, to the fact that we're missing by light years our child poverty targets. Can you imagine? People say politics makes no difference, but Can you imagine a Jacinda Ardern government being sat there, having missed its child poverty targets by so far and not doing anything about it? Right? When people tell you politics makes no difference, right? Can you imagine a Jacinda Ardern government being sat down and saying, do you know what? We're only going to increase ECE funding by 0.5% after we've just had a debacle of Family Boost, where no one was getting the money anyway. Where we're going to take, $6,000 a minute, right, out of 330,000 low-paid female workers through pay equity deals, right? There's plenty of things to do, and there's plenty of things that will. And my play is get on board, get involved, because we need to be getting those messages out there over the next, 530 days until the next election, when we'll be told, so people can have that story in their head. They know what's really happening in their name in this budget.
And I think the other thing I'd add to that, Craig, is, they talk big about we've, record investment in this, record investment in this. Every dollar that's more than what you put in last year, irrespective of inflation, irrespective of population growth, is always bigger. So, for example, the net capital over the forecast period, so in Labor's last budget, 2023, it was $65.6 billion. This year, $51 billion. That's not just small change. That's billions and billions and billions of dollars less investment in capital budgets across the public sector. And what's that? That's infrastructure. That's, the funding that you could do around hospitals, health, across all the different sectors. So that's a really big drop. So forget the hype, forget the record budget, and actually look into the detail, because actually everything's there under the hood. And it's just quite interesting to see that these are not the things you'll hear from the Minister of Finance, but that's our job, right?
These are not the numbers you thought they were. Is that what you do when you try and trick someone from Star Wars? That was a Star Wars reference, Chewie. That was a Star Wars reference. Jeremy wants to know if support workers are affected by the 2025 budget. If so, how much, please? Obviously, every person is going to get impacted, but I guess Jeremy's saying directly and specifically what's happening with support workers, if anything. Anyone know?
That's the pay equity changes.
So pay equity.
Yeah. So Jeremy, there was the pay equity claims that were put in, obviously, for support workers, particularly for aged care. Those 33 claims were cancelled. They've basically lifted the ladder about 10 metres higher and expect you to jump that 10 metres to get on that first run. So obviously it's harder for support workers to apply for the claim. But, the interesting thing is the government said, we've saved, $12 billion from this. But then when you ask them, so how much have you actually put aside? Because you said you put some stuff aside. Oh, that's commercially sensitive. So Jeremy, the future pay of support workers at the moment, it will depend on whether you can actually be, whether you as a support worker or anyone else as a support worker will be able to qualify for the new pay equity regime.
Yeah, there's been a couple of questions, and I'm bad of me, I guess. I thought, it'll be a chill night, just talk to some nice people. I should have prepped it. But a couple of times Nicola Willis got asked specific questions about how much will it was like, what was the cutoff? It was a specific, what will the cutoff be for a certain, and she didn't have the answer. She's like, that'll be coming in the forthcoming weeks. Like, what? But hang on, if you've done the budget, you should know that today. What is where will that start? Where will the new, maybe it was an income for they were readjusting one, whether it was EC or whatever, and she didn't have the answer. She said there'll be more announcements in the forthcoming weeks. Why is there fucking more announcements in the forthcoming weeks when she's printed the thing out? I don't get it.
It's a great question, Pat. I wish I could give you a good answer to that. The other thing for support workers, of course, is that they will lose half of the KiwiSaver contribution that the government was making to their KiwiSaver, which, as Chewie said, $60,000 across the lifetime of someone starting work today. They may well also be, if they're in receipt of support, if they've got family and they've got working for families, that's now going to abate more quickly. So every time they earn an extra dollar, they're going to lose more in terms of their working for families payments. And what they're not going to see are big investments in improving the ecosystem in which they work, health, education, local authorities, housing, all of the stuff that would make a really big difference to their ability to do a job and do it well. And the care people I talk to in the trade union movement, they want to do a really good job, and they want the tools to be able to do a really good job. And as often as it's not, they're not going to receive it. So, for example, the government set aside $24 million over 4 years. So that's $6 million a year to support elderly people moving out of hospitals and into care homes. That is such an insultingly small amount of money. If I was the minister responsible, I would have refused to have published it.
Wow.
Because if you can imagine the level of need in that sector, and you're saying to someone, do you know what? I'm going to give you around about $100,000 a week extra for the entire country on that issue, right? I would have said, do you know what? Don't bother, right? Instead, we're seeing their ability to do their job increasingly diminished across the country.
But remember, Craig, I'm a pensioner. I get a rates rebate. How much do I get?
It's really interesting you asked that question, Barbara, because if you get a rates rebate as a senior gold card holder, you get 28 cents a week extra in rates
56
rebate.
a fortnight.
Don't spend it all in one shop.
Come on, 56 cents a fortnight. Be fair. It's a bigger number. Amos has got a question as well. Amos, he says, question for you too. What do you guys think? What do you guys think next government should do economically to help get us back in, but also help build us back up? So I guess this is always going to be a question, Barb, probably aimed mostly at you, but Craig, you're obviously part of the team. Cut, 116, I think we said earlier. Things being taken away, things being made harder. What does the next government, which I'm assuming you hope you are a part of, need to do to help fix all this? Is this like a generational fix, or could we turn it around quite quickly?
You have to invest, right? You got to make the choices to invest in smart areas. This won't be a quick turnaround because this is some massive amounts that they've cut from almost every sector. It's not just a little bit, it's every sector. So in order to be able to get the workforce up and running again, like the apprenticeship boost, right? We're going to invest more in infrastructure and increase that net capital costs across the forecast period. Then we're going to need the workers to be here to build. But we've lost 13,000 construction sector roles in the last year. They've gone.
Yeah.
So we're going to need to rebuild up a sector as part of that workforce development sort of plan as well. So it comes down to smart investment and the types of choices that you make. So by the government pausing, holding, cancelling infrastructure over the last year, that's why we've seen a massive dive. Because as we've said time and time again, the government's job is to help smooth these cycles. When the market's tanking, that's when the government invests. When the government, and it goes like that. That's the way the lever is, which is why we keep saying this is an austerity budget, because as the market is cutting back, the government is cutting back. So what's left in the economy for people to work towards when actually the labour market is now tighter, unemployment is higher, and for Pacific and Māori people, for those that can work, it's 1 in 10 people are unemployed.
Yeah.
It's just shocking.
And just remember, Craig, you said this the other night, austerity, difficult economic conditions created by government measures to help reduce public expenditure. So the government has to have a hand in it. We're not going to get a chance to hit everyone's questions, but here's one more for now from Gold. Barbara, after this budget and everything else, is it feeling like the country may be ready for a policy platform of tax the rich? What do we say, Chewie? Tax wealth more, tax work less? Are we? Look, I think I can answer on behalf of us, being the country. Are we ready for it? I guess we need to ask you, is Labor ready to actually push it through, or capital gains tax, or some other things that in the last few elections have kind of shied away from?
We will be ready, and we will announce it when we are ready. And I know I say this every time I come onto the show, but I can assure you that we're going to be coming to the country with the alternative, which shows that we are building for our future and for our kids' future, so they want to stay here.
Can we ask a favour as well? I mean, like, we can talk to Chippy at some stage, but it won't be tonight.
Go on, then.
Can you ask Chippy to stop talking about how unrealistic the Greens and stuff are? He doesn't have to get in there and say, "Nah, they won't really work." He can just say, "Well, that's an interesting plan. I guess if we form an if we get a chance to talk after the election, we'll talk through what each party wants." But I get why. But we said the other day with the unrealistic claim, if Luxon had said that, it still would have made sense in that voice. So we just you guys are friends. Don't give ACT, which did happen, fodder to attack one of your bros for after the election. That's all. Just a little thing.
I'll take that note for you.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, man.
I think Patrick, one of the things we actually genuinely need to do after all of this, right, and leading into the next election, right, is to have an honest conversation in New Zealand about what's actually needed, right?
Yeah.
So Chippy has talked about the need to actually look at the liabilities that we're creating that we don't measure in the budget, right? The more people in homelessness, right? The fact that when we put more people into unemployment or out of work, we don't measure the long-term costs of that. When we don't invest in the schools and hospitals, we don't look at the fact that future generations are going to have to pay for it because we can't be bothered to, right? And one of the things we need to do, and as part of that question about how do we build a better future, how do we have a different conversation about tax, how do we have a different conversation about what's needed, we need to be honest and say, what does good look like and how do we get there? And we're not going to get there straight away. We're not going to get there next week, right? I'd love for there to be free dental, right, tomorrow. But even if I wanted to, even if I could chuck trillions of dollars at it, there just aren't dentists. I just couldn't do it. So what does good look like and how do we get there? And how do we have an honest conversation with people so we can actually talk about infrastructure need, we can actually talk about spending need, and we can actually talk about why the tax cuts are counterproductive. Why when we spend less in areas, it actually costs us more in the future. And we can all build that case for why we should be doing things differently to what's been advertised at this budget. Because make no mistake, this budget and the budget beforehand essentially are trying to go against 250 years of economic history. They're trying to say we're going to cut our way out of a downturn, right? Now, best of luck. It's never been done before. I love a brave decision in government, but let's not experiment on New Zealand and the next generation of people. Let's instead do the things we know need doing, right? And why the Treasury recommended against a whole bunch of the cuts that are actually inside this budget right now.
And that was the whole point, Craig, of those well-being budgets, because you can't just measure the wealth of the health of an economy on GDP. You got to understand the economic scarring. You got to understand it's like, that's great. We're growing as an economy, but we got people sleeping in cars. It doesn't match. And that was the whole point of that work with the well-being budget, So that's why it's important to have a different measurement as to what a healthy and a good society looks like as well.
I like the difference in the people on screen right now that, Chewie's in love with Star Wars things, so over his shoulder there's some Star Wars things, and Craig's in love with budgets, so over his shoulder is a case full of previous. But late night, I can't get to sleep tonight. What should I do? Oh, 2019 was a pretty good year. Well, let's have a look at that.
A fine vintage.
I was going to say, I don't know if I can move my camera, but I've got them going back to Sir Michael Cullen here.
Okay.
So yeah, somebody once said that a copy of an economic or fiscal update on a shelf was a real dating red flag, and basically I've got an entire shelf of these things. So I'm going to probably leave that there.
I don't want to talk too much about your personal life, but I'm sure that your partner kind of likes them as well, though. Hey, I'm sure she does. For people who don't know, works in the same field. That's why works in the same field. Anyway.
Just to piggyback off what Craig was saying there about having an honest conversation about these sort of economic issues that we have in the future that we want for New Zealand. Do you know what a big part of that honest conversation would be? the media. And certainly I noticed someone had their funding cut this time round. Radio New Zealand had some budget slashed. So we can chuck that in the pile of discarded media. We are having less and less media resources able to look at things like this budget and give us that honest conversation. Give us that easier, digested sort of like, you don't have to go to university and study economics to understand this. This is what it means. We've got less and less of that. And now we're going to have political commentators and people that don't have an expertise in that area packaging up sound bites and vomiting that back out to us, and people going, sounds good to me. Roll the dice.
We'll wrap up shortly-ish. I mean, an hour is more than enough for us to have an expectation. But just so you know, when we do an hour here, it's like a 20-minute one elsewhere. So this is like, thanks for your 20 minutes. I've just been writing down a bunch of questions to chuck at you at the end sort of thing. I'll just go through them, and they don't have to be long answers. But who would like to take a wager if there will be a $200 million surplus in 2029? I wager not. I'm prepared to put quite a large wager on the fact that if they think that they've got their budget nailed down so much that they've got it to that would be like a household budget down to the micro cent, getting it right.
I think it'll be the Obergal triple X by that particular point in time, because the only way in which we'll actually get to Obergal is to keep changing how we're going to define it until we actually get to that point. So yeah, I think it's absolutely bonkers to be
But Craig, did you notice, Craig, the language in the budget economic fiscal update was really caveated? It was like very uncertainty. There is the weaker outlook, lower short-term prospects, but we think it's going to get better. I was really quite surprised at the language that they used in it.
Yep, and the language that struck out to me in particular, for those of you who are following at home, page 8 of the budget economic and fiscal update says that the budget will result in lower future wages for New Zealanders.
Wow.
That's the Treasury saying that.
Yeah, well, one of my questions was Treasury says what? So maybe we could just finish that. What else do they say? Anything else?
So Treasury says lower future wages. Treasury says lower expected growth. It says lower expected real wage growth. So even after you've paid for inflation, that's going to be less than it was just last year. There's lower levels of housing investment. But the one thing this government is bringing back, because Lord knows it won't rest until it brings it back.
No.
House prices are going back up 5 to 6% a year, right? Because we run an economy to make sure that house prices keep going up.
Craig, you were on a podcast last night where a certain very strangely positioned once conservative who hates Christopher Luxon and who knows what his bag really is right now, Mr. Hooton, said today they would deliver more cuts. What was it? More cuts, more tax, and borrow more than basically anyone of history. Was he correct overall?
Well, we spend more money because inflation goes up, the population goes up, and the economy goes up. It's not a meaningful figure. It doesn't actually tell us anything helpful, right?
What about
it's
the borrowing more and cutting more?
We are borrowing more money. We're borrowing an extra $4.4 billion of new borrowing in comparison to the last update just 6 months ago. We are cutting certainly more. We're cutting $8.2 billion of existing expenditure on top of the $12.8 billion of pay equity claims that have been grabbed.
So 20 billion in cuts, both current
20
and
billion
future.
in cuts. Yep. And we're certainly indicating our likelihood that we're going to keep doing that in the future because we kept the operating allowances at the same level. In doing that, we bake in future cuts year after year after year. It's the only way in which the government can make the books balance and reach that optical illusion in the far off distance that is that Obergal surplus at the end of 2029. So he's right to that extent, but the real thing is unemployment's up, fewer jobs, lower incomes, the things that matter to people, all of those indicators are getting worse.
Anything you want to add to that, Barb? That particular question?
No, I mean, Craig's got it in a nutshell, right? And it's just nailed it. But it's remember, we just can't forget behind every number is a person. Every number is a person and a family that supports that person. And we have to remember that every single time. So that's the best thing to say to your family and friends when they're asking you about this budget. Who is paying for this? Low-paid women and their kids and their kids' kids, because this is the generational impact that happens from low wages.
My sort of last question, more of an observation. Barb, I've been watching you through this conversation and you seem shattered. You seem like I'm saying, like, no, you seem like it seems heavy on you. And what you've just said there, I'm like, at what point do you genuinely feel this is too much? Like, you're a mum of about 300 kids or something, but like, how do you kind of keep going through? Because this looks heavy on you. Does it feel heavy on you? And if it does, what do you do with that?
Well, that's because I'm their voice, right? You know, when I'm speaking to me, and I've had, I think, almost 10 rounds of media today. When I'm speaking to media, I am carrying the voice of those 180,000 workers, plus the 170 who've been cut, plus those 61,000 families who are now getting less. So in some ways, it is a heavy burden to carry because you carry their voice. But at the same time, my belly's on fire because that's why I came here. It wasn't about my kids. My kids are fine. It's about the opportunities for all those other kids who don't have the same opportunities as my kids. Because I was brought up with the government and through government policies that meant that me, a child on the benefit, didn't fall through it was brought up on the benefit, didn't fall through the cracks, and could become a tax lawyer. So you have to remember that every day when you come into this place. And today, I was remembering all those hundreds of thousands of people who are basically getting shafted by this budget, and I'm doing this for them, and they're fueling me as well.
I think you've just found your positioning statement for the election next year there, Barb, wouldn't you say, Chewie?
Yes, the economy is people. It's not graphs. We love a graph. We love a graph. But yes, the economy is people. The stats are people. They are lives that are going to get better, or they are lives that are going to get worse. I was a kid that grew up in another period of economic disorder. I very much remember my mum losing her job for the IRD and my dad losing his job in the freezing works in the coal stores of Timaru. And I remember what that meant for me as a kid, seeing our dinners change. Whether I got an after school snack or not. And I saw that reflected in other kids at school going through exactly the same thing, because that was the socio-economic area that school served. And I'm sure at that point as well, there were finance ministers going, well, there's hard choices got to be made. And someone gave me this book that says neoliberalism is the solution. And we're still dealing with the scars of that time and what happened afterwards with Ruth Richardson. And I think what we have here is we've given neoliberalism a good go for 40 years, and it's delivered us here. And here is not a good place to be. We need to break the wheel. We need some brave choices that just really front foot the people of New Zealand. And that is the focus. If the people are fed, if the people are educated, if the people are healthy, if the people have money in their pocket, then our economy is good. I think with neoliberalism, it comes backwards, that if we follow these steps to keep business happy, to keep the wealthy happy, to keep people's property portfolio stacked, then that flows down to the people and they're happy. It doesn't work like that. We have decades of proof that it doesn't work like that. So are we going to put a new coat of paint on the wheel, or are we going to break it and build something better? I don't have to
couldn't
run
agree
for
more.
office, so I don't have to
good.
back any of that up. But I hope
Viva la-
somebody smarter than me is going for it.
Viva la resistance. Is that right? Something like that. Hey, look,
Look,
and
I've
just,
been watching a lot of Andor lately, so yeah, yeah, let's do
and
it.
look, finally, Craig and Barb, just thanks so much for what you guys are doing, because like we're just a couple of rodeo clowns in Dunedin who we talk about people doing things, and you guys are the people doing things. And I know that the chat is incredibly grateful to have access to you guys. We're incredibly grateful as well, but you know, we're only here providing this information to people because there's people like you two who are actually doing the mahi to get that information out that we can then pass on to other people. So just a big thanks to you two for what you're doing, for what your teams are doing. Yeah, thanks for your time tonight. And if you want to leave us with anything, you're more than welcome. If not, we'll let you go and sink into a bottle of Chardonnay or whatever people do when they're feeling like that. I'm not sure.
I'm giving the Child Poverty Action Group speech tomorrow morning. So I'll be at St. Peter's Church at 6:30 tomorrow morning, talking about this, and then I leave there and I go to the Tertiary Education Union conference and do this again at 9:30. So tomorrow is another big day for us here. I guess the thing I'd ask the audience to take away from this is the budget's today, but the real work starts tomorrow. The real work starts to get out to the public, that change is possible. Budgets, as Barbara and as Chippy talk about, budgets are about choices, right? And we can make different choices and we can choose better outcomes, right? We just actively have to do that. And in 530 days' time, the 1,000 viewers on the screen and the how many thousand viewers who watch this on a YouTube clip, right, have a job to do. And that's to choose a different government at the next election and to create the scenario in which we can have a different government at the next election. Because otherwise, we'll have 1,000 more days of this. And I don't want that for us because, frankly, the damage that's been done in the 500 days that we've had to date, right, another 1,500 days of this doesn't bear thinking about.
Excellent. There is one other job you do have to do, Craig, and that's send me an introduction for tomorrow morning's podcast. Because I need to make it after the show. So maybe you could jump off and talk to your camera and explain that tomorrow's podcast episode always happens. I ask for a favor and Craig's internet craps out.
And he's out.
Always good. He's done. That's like when you go, sorry, can't hear. Sorry, can't hear. Do.
Going into a tunnel. You're in your office.
Going into a tunnel.
Into a tunnel.
To record something for me on your phone, Craig, and email it to me, and I'll put it on tonight. Explain that tomorrow's podcast is this, and then da-da-da-da. And that's it. And we'll leave you to it. All right, guys. Hey, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate that. It's the busiest day of the year for you guys, and giving us a bit of time has been spectacular. Thanks, Barb.
Thank you.
Cheers, Bob. Give him hell.